Hello, everyone. It's Doug Woodward here with a returning guest, Chris Steinle. Chris, welcome to the hot seat.
Hey, Doug, it's great to be back in the seat again, and
Oh, good.
hopefully I can keep it cool,
Yeah,
cool head here, and
warm
not get
bottom but a cool
overheated.
head. A warm bottom but a cool head. I hope. So, okay. Well, anyway, we're going today to talk about Chris's new book. It's called "The Singularity Prophecy," and let me just kind of real quickly remind you that Chris is he's trained. Has a degree in physics. Okay, so he's sort of a trained physicist, and yet on the other hand, he's really been in the ministry his career, and he's preached. He's taught Bible in Israel. He was the CFO for True News. He's done a lot of really interesting things in his career, and we have had a chance to talk with Chris a couple of times earlier. Once he and I did a show on the rapture question and whether or not the rapture, the pre-trib rapture and the post-trib rapture, which one of those is historically more consistent with the Bible, consistent with Christianity. So we had that discussion, which a lot of people really enjoyed. And then Chris has also participated in a discussion on the Commonwealth theology, along with Gavin Finley and Doug Krieger. And so Chris has been on the show. Now this will be your third time, I believe, Chris.
I think so.
Yeah, so that's great. So you're way ahead. It's kind of like the guys on Saturday Night Live that count the number of times they've hosted. You can say, "Well, I've been on the hot seat 3 times," so that's pretty cool. I think. All right.
I agree. What an
Cool.
honor.
Very. Oh, great. Well, it's my honor actually to have you. All right, Chris. So explain the title to us because that'll help us understand where we're going with this. And I promise the listener this book is on physics and the universe and so forth, but we're going to do our best to keep it at a level that anyone watching this program can go, okay, now I get it, now I understand. And so we're going to try to provide that kind of level of understanding. And no, we're not going to do formulas because I get a headache when someone does formulas, physics formulas. E equals mc squared is about the only one I really know that's in physics anyway. So we're going to go with that. Okay, Chris, you're on. Tell us about the title of the book and kind of the method and the madness, I guess.
All right. Well, when we speak of singularity in the quantum physics realm or in the astrophysics realm, we're talking about black holes. We're talking about perhaps a plasma situation, a very condensed and a unification of matter to its smallest content. And not only that, but the smallest particles that can be examined. And that's kind of where the word comes from, the quanta or smallest quantity that can be examined. So, but the singularity has to do with superposition in quantum physics. And I'm proposing that this is very much what's happening in the coming convergence of heaven and earth, that it can be understood in terms of physics and actually makes a whole lot more sense than a lot of the things that theoretical physicists are coming up with today.
Right.
And so that this whole thing started with prayer, really, in my morning prayer time and out early under the stars and looking up at the heavens and considering how great this universe is, how majestic we've found it to be with our powerful telescopes, electron telescopes and all. And yet, at the same time, considering that I'm in Christ and Christ is in me, the Lord, God, is one. You see, that's also singularity. And so this opened up a whole raft of ideas, not only having to do with the convergence of the material and spiritual realm into a glorified state, which is just the same thing that's being talked about in physics as far as the many worlds concepts and parallel universes and coming together, and this idea of singularity that we see in the movie Interstellar, for instance.
Hmm.
That whole idea is can be grasped with the same intellectual framework
Hmm.
as theoretical physics, and and yet I also wanted to go beyond that to the fact that we own in Christ this singularity now, that we have this oneness as Jesus prayed in John 17 now. Now, I started this book and I wanted to make it an evangelistic book. And so I opened it up, developing the idea that from the time of the ancients, they had a concept of heaven, not just the stars, but a heavenly realm. And this was so entrenched that they had figures that represented this. They had what they called the world tree, which represented the heaven, the earth, and the underworld.
Hmm.
And obviously, the heaven and the underworld are supernatural and always have been, but have been embraced for thousands of years by mankind. And, you know, it used to be when I was growing up, and perhaps you as well, that in the social sciences, it was taught that religion was one of the basic elements that man needed, you know, a basic necessity. And that's kind of been taken off of the list, but there are still some people in psychology who insist that that is very much still present. And if you look back in history, it's certainly been present. So what I want to do, and what I have done in the book, is I introduce the reader to these historical references through the world tree, which which is all over the world. I mean, we're talking about Haiti, Finland, Lithuania, Hungary, India, China, Japan, the area of Yucatan.
Okay.
And
Let me interpret. Doesn't the world tree sort of represent that, virtually all of these religions have a concept of sort of a three-tier universe? There's the
yes,
above, there's us here in this world that we observe, and then there's something beneath us that, down is bad, up is good. And of course, some say, well,
hmm
no, that actually means that there really are souls in the center of the earth. And I don't think so, but there is this thing called the abyss. And so maybe, I don't know if you have a
and
position on that.
Sheol.
And Sheol, and so maybe, maybe that's getting it too physical. I don't know. But nevertheless, this concept, I think to me, that's the key point you're making, is that if you look at all these religions, every one of them is trying to deal with this notion of the supernatural, and how do we rationalize that supernatural with the world in which we live. Is that fair?
That's right, and it goes beyond the world tree. If you look at even Plato's writings,
Hmm.
in the end of his Republic, you have this myth of and was supposedly killed in battle. And on the 10th day, when they were dragging off the bodies, they took him to a funeral pyre, put him on the the wood, and on the 12th day he woke up, and he seemed to have an out of body experience.
Mm.
A lot of people who have had near death or maybe death experiences have kind of
Indeed.
given the same kind of
Hmm.
reports, but this goes into great detail about these channels that go into the heavens and down into the underworld, and how there's this notion of judgment and that sort of thing. And then you see the same thing confirmed in the Book of Enoch.
Yeah, I was getting
Uh,
ready to ask that. That of course is a great subject for the audience, because most of the audience will be familiar with the Book of Enoch, and will kind of go, "Now, how does that relate to the Book of Enoch?" So, how does it relate to the Book of Enoch?
all right. Well, it starts out at the Valley of Judgment, and then they've got these chains of Satan that are for the kings of the earth, and you see that right out of Isaiah, I believe, chapter 24, could be 25, where the kings are bound. So there's parallel there. and you have the Lord of Spirits. And so the Lord of Spirits has this vengeance against these kings that have been the world rulers, as Paul calls them,
Yep.
that have been ruling over the world unrighteously.
Right.
So they're bound. And then now this is very
Let me
interesting
ask:
because yes,
is the is that the same as the Psalm 82, Michael Heiser's concept of the divine council? I mean, there's Psalm 2, which talks about the kings of the earth and how God basically laughs at the kings of the earth, and that they better kiss the Son, because if not,
yeah.
they're going to get judged.
Well, oh, I think there's definitely a relationship there,
Mhm.
but I think it's more related to Revelation and chapter 20, where Satan is bound, and uh, the we don't see the kings that are under him bound, but the same sort of thing. Uh,
Where you have the ten kings that are in alliance with the Antichrist, and of
mhm.
course the Antichrist is Satan's henchman, and so yeah, they're spoken of. They're involved in the destruction of Mystery Babylon, and so forth.
Right, and one of the jewels of the Book of Enoch is the reference to the fact that the Lord of Spirits appoints the elect one to
Mm,
do the judging,
yeah,
and that's right from John 5:22, and in Revelation 4 and 5, who can open the seals of the book and to judge Azazel and his armies, basically. And anyway,
yeah.
and so I'm walking people through the book, and what I'm showing is the reality in the thought of mankind of a heavenly realm, and that it is definitely there. It's not just in Christianity. Somebody might be watching the program, they're not a Christian at all, they're curious, and they think that the idea of heaven and hell is just something that Christians made up,
Mm,
or that the church made up in the first few centuries. And so what I'm demonstrating here is no, it's not, absolutely not. And then in the book, I turn to mankind's kind of quest for the ultimate reality. So not only is there a consciousness in the heart of man that there is a heavenly, a spiritual realm, but there's also this consciousness that man is somehow supposed to climax or achieve some kind of ultimate reality. And I track that through Buddhism, Confucianism, Chinese theology, Hinduism, and that's very interesting reading. And so, one of the things I would say is even though this book is very developed, I think it's all enjoyable
mm,
reading. I think it's all intriguing, and that the people will learn a lot. I know I did
right.
in putting it together.
Well, absolutely, and I think when if you are confounded by the formulas as I am, you just move past them. You just read
Well,
the
yeah.
explanation. You don't have to know what psi and pi and gamma and all these other things really mean. Because I tell you, I got a master's in finance, and I had to learn formulas and all that. Yeah, truly, it just gave me a headache. But
And
anyway,
it's kind of humorous that Cambridge has some courses that they've put online, and they have courses in quantum mechanics and things like that you can view. And a lot of the professors, and even Sean Carroll, who's a leader in theoretical physics and quantum mechanics and that sort of thing, they all basically say, we let the mathematicians solve these formulas, or a supercomputer. We don't do that ourselves
that's
anymore.
right.
It's kind of like when you and I sat for the CPA exam, we couldn't use calculators,
Yep.
and we were dividing, to 14 decimal points or whatever to work out
Yeah.
some for
Can you do long division? Oh gosh, yeah, it's been a long time since I've
yeah,
done long
yeah.
division.
And then I don't know how many years ago it was that they started letting the people use calculators instead
Yeah.
of doing the math.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same way in physics. The
Our minds to mush.
the physicists don't do the math. They come up with these theories and formulas, and then they let the supercomputers crunch it all. So
Yeah.
don't feel bad, and the audience don't feel bad, and you don't need to understand all the formulas, but it's the theoretical part, it's the philosophical part that philosophy of physics both
Mhm.
arrive at the same point, and that's where I bring the reader as the book advances to realize that
Mhm.
and be able to realize, yes, we're talking about the same thing. They just won't put it in these terms, and we won't put it in their terms.
All right. Well, let's back up. We're going to take this sort of a step at a time, and we're going to talk about some of these really incredibly interesting theories in physics. But the first point, I guess, I was going to just reinforce what you were talking about in terms of the quest for the ultimate reality is that all these religions have an afterlife, and then they sort of all have a well. Now, how do we get to the afterlife,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And so they all it's like all of humanity. Jung might have called it the collective unconscious or whatever, but there's this sort of innate. I think the Bible says, God has put
Eternity.
eternity in the heart of man, right? Yeah, and
Yes.
so so we're all the same. We all need to have this. We have this quest to how do we get to ultimate reality. So that's and of course I guess that is in effect that's the groundwork you're laying to say, okay, now is the physicist, the theoretical physicist basically, is he or she also trying to get to that ultimate reality and trying to find the means to do that?
Oh yeah, they definitely are. They definitely are. And that's so obvious, when they named the Higgs boson the God particle. And
Mm,
actually the physicists didn't do that. The press did that in order to grab a headline because they said, how are we going to make the public have any interest in this new field, the Higgs field,
right.
uh, why, who cares? And then they said, "Oh, we'll call it the God particle." And unfortunately, that
Yeah.
stuck, and it really has nothing to do with
Right.
God
Right.
whatsoever. But
Yeah.
it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the book, I go through actually Hinduism,
Mhm.
Buddhism, Norse mythology,
Yeah. I thought
even
that was interesting.
Ragnarok and
Yeah. Thor
uh,
and Loki.
Ragnarok and Thor. Yeah, that's a real thing from their
Isn't it?
theology and how it
Yeah.
all works out to where
Right.
they get to the end of the world. And the
Yeah.
Hopi, it's amazing. The Hopi actually successfully, accurately predicted that settlers would come
Mm.
into their territory and the birth of telecommunications and even the internet.
Yeah.
They forecast all those things. And so you've got to put a little stock in how they see the end going down. And
Right.
they see this blue star Caccino, which
Yep.
is foreboding of an asteroid. I'll have to
Hitting the
say,
earth. Yes. Well, I was
yeah,
gonna say that
yeah.
was back in the 2012 literature, which I was kind of my first book. Our second book was Decoding Doomsday. I talked a bit about the 2012, sort of stuff, and I guess the Cherokees shared that prophecy with the Hopi in terms of this blue sort of asteroid or whatever that hits the Earth. And of course, the 2012ers were all saying, "Well, that's going to happen in 2012," and it hasn't. Now, Tom Horn says, "Well, it's going to happen in 2025." So
Yeah.
have you read Tom's The Messenger and no?
No, I haven't. I'm looking at that though. I've
Yeah.
been examining it. I'm probably going to download it soon.
Yes. Well, that's of course what Tom is getting to is basically the NASA's understanding of Apophis, and they say, well, it's going to be kind of a near miss, and Tom says, "That's not what I hear. When I talk to people that are kind of at NASA or sort of know what's going on, it really could hit the Earth. It's not just a distant possibility; it's a realistic possibility." And so he obviously contemplates that it could be wormwood and
Hmm.
of the Bible. So okay, all right. So let's talk a little bit about the prophecies because you do go through and you talk a bit about the culmination sort of prophecies in these religions. Is there anything in those that the one that I guess I was going to ask which one sort of strikes you as maybe the most interesting of these? I was thinking maybe the one from India is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, there's a couple, the Hinduism and the Mahayanan Buddhism.
Yes.
And yeah, well, I think the Buddhism actually, uh, they think there's this endless cycle of creation and destruction,
Hmm.
and these cycles called kalpas.
Hmm.
And they think that they last from 10 to 15 billion years.
Yeah.
Um, they think each one begins with a golden age where everybody's into Buddha, and Buddha is present with them. And then eschatology, the end comes when people start to disregard the teachings of Buddha. And
Yeah.
then you got the arrival of the Maitreya or Maitreya. Uh,
Lord Maitreya.
yeah, the super Buddha.
Right.
Okay, and he's gonna. It's interesting what he's going to be teaching. He's going to be teaching the 10 virtues.
Mm.
Wonder where he
In
got that.
virtues. Yeah.
Yeah, and against the 10 non-virtuous deeds. And then there's this sermon of the seven sons. So okay, this is kind of cool.
Mm.
Not really. It's kind of hot, but you've
Go
got
for it. Go for it.
you've got a son now, and then you got these sons. He keeps adding sons. We get more and more sons,
Hmm.
and the sermon of the seven sons. And so the earth is by the sixth son, the earth is baking, and by the seventh son, the earth is a fireball,
Hmm.
and it doesn't even leave any ashes.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's
Now,
still good news. It all begins again, right?
yeah, it all begins again, but kind of the non-PC aspect of that is in the Kalakakra Tantra. It says there, good and quote, a great war and Armageddon will destroy the barbaric Muslim forces.
Yeah,
I'm going
there
to
you
say hordes.
go.
Yeah, so
That why the
they
Chinese have locked up all of the Muslims in that camp out in China because it's that they're trying to destroy the Muslims.
well, now it depends on the Buddha influence in China, I
Yeah.
suppose, and that's pretty strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
There
so
might be.
yeah,
There might
it
be.
might
Might
be.
be related to that.
It
You
might
don't
be
know.
very much, yeah, because we all pay attention to in our various mythologies and of course with the truth of the Bible, how things are going to end and watch for how they're lining up and what we're supposed to do even. So I guess I would have to say that was kind of one of my favorites. And I
Yeah.
think the other one may have been Ragnarok.
Yeah.
Ra-
It's pretty interesting.
Itself, and basically
Right.
you've got all these gods fighting with other gods, and Odin and his sons fighting, and they have these serpents and various monsters that
Kind of
they're
sounds like the
fighting.
movies we're watching these days. The Avengers.
Yeah, very much.
The new one is coming out. The Eternals. Is just another
Right,
take on
right.
that, right?
I heard about that. I was going to see it, but I have some drawbacks now that I know a little more about it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know if
I
I
found
can.
I was going to comment on the I guess it's Hinduism that deals with Kalki, and then there's the god Vishnu, the Kali Yoga, the four periods of endless cycles of existence. Which you're right. I mean, they also have this golden age concept. But what I just noticed in looking at this is Kalki also called Kalkin. That sure
Mhm.
sounds similar to Kukulkan, doesn't it?
Oh,
In
yeah, it sure does.
in the Mayan cosmology, and so you kind of see these crossovers from people that are supposedly separated by 13,000 miles on different
Yeah.
sides of the world, and yet, son of a gun, there's still commonalities between them. So how in the world
The
would
Palenque. I mentioned
yeah
this in the book, the
yeah
Palenque, and that's down kind of in between. It's in the saddle between mainland Mexico and the Yucatan,
yeah
and they had their own world tree. It's I have a image of that in the book. People can check that out. But
yeah?
so there's just a lot of interesting facts that people probably didn't know
Well,
that
that's
are part
right.
of this journey in the book.
Yeah, we're not the only ones that have eschatology. Obviously, a lot of our viewers will know a little bit about Muslim eschatology. in the fact that there's a Jesus and Jesus is involved in defeating the Antichrist, Majal, and so forth. But he's not at the same level of of Jesus that we worship. But nevertheless, it's interesting that these other religions have, to your point, and the research that you've done shows that they also have an end times, understanding or cosmology as well. So there is clearly, consensus of that. So I'm going to jump to what is chapter 4 in your book, Evidence of the Unseen Realm, Aliens, Angels, and Demons. Do you want to comment of just kind of some at the outset? We'll kind of dig into this for a few minutes.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned that you were going to hit me on that one,
Yeah,
light up the hot seat.
there you go.
Yeah, part of this evidence, there's not only that section, I have a section on why aliens are in vogue
Mhm.
and spatial versus spiritual visitors. In other words, this is an interesting concept that has to do with um, ultra terrestrials
Mhm.
and then creation and extraterrestrial life. So those are all covered in this chapter.
Right.
But to start out with, in this discussion of angels, I bring up that there's some problems, and why is it that people all over the world, Christians and non-Christians, are so fascinated, are so in tune to what's happening with this conversation of aliens? And I want to bring up that there's some chinks in the armor
Mm.
of the scientific conclusions from the 20th century and the way that they kind of laid out our way of thinking, which includes evolution.
Mhm.
And what we find there uh, are some contradictions, some
Sure.
huge contradictions, and one of them is that most of these evolutionists believe in a spiritual realm and spiritual activity. That's why they have these crystals hanging from their rear view, their rear view mirror,
Yep.
and things like that. They actually do believe, and paranormal and
Yep.
ghosts
Don't believe in God,
the
but they believe in the
satanic
supernatural.
activity. And
Right.
so the question is, where did that realm come from?
Mhm.
Did it evolve? And I really go into that later in the book, but this is just
Yeah.
uh, kind of developing. It's an appetizer
Yeah. It's a teaser.
for, yeah, it's a teaser.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you also got the frequency of extinction events, and
Mm.
you don't have these long
Yeah.
epics for development because they're just they're too brief between these extinction events for man
Yes.
to develop, and so that whole thing doesn't work. In fact,
Yeah.
they say that it takes about 1 million years for one transition to take place,
Mhm.
and they also posit that the Earth has been inhabitable or whatever for around 4 million years.
4 million or 4 billion?
I'm sorry, 4 billion. I'm sorry,
4 billion. Yeah,
four
that's
four
right.
billion.
That's
Yeah,
why I'm here.
and so
Economics.
yeah, you do the math. Okay, a zero or two. Uh,
Just don't put it in
anyway, so that means there should be 4,000 times more transitional fossils
Yeah.
than the fossils of known identified
Right.
species.
Right.
And you shouldn't be able to walk out your front door without tripping over piles of
Right.
transitional fossils. And yet they've got people now have spent the last 100 years or so
Mhm.
trying to find just one
Mhm.
of these missing links. And the thing is, they really are missing. They're
Yeah.
just not there. So they got a huge problem with
Well,
that.
they
I
do
I
have.
think they thought they would find them right away.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the 1900s or whatever, they thought, okay, we'll just start coming up with a bunch of these and shut everybody up.
Oh, yeah.
And they never have found them.
That's
So
yeah, that's Darwinism, and Darwinism is not really an empirical science because
no,
the fossil record doesn't really support
it,
the theory of evolution arising from without any guidance.
yeah, and you've got to say, okay, these transitional fossils had the same fair shot at being fossilized
Yeah.
as the one of known species that did get fossilized.
Hmm.
And so it's not only doesn't support it, it's an absolute glaring contradiction.
Right. Right.
It doesn't help their cause. They shouldn't even
Well,
bring it up.
this is a little bit of a sidebar, but I read a book called, I think it's called The Fifth Extinction Event or something like that. The Fifth Extinction, and what the book's premise is, which is kind of, you hear this pretty much now in not anthropology as much as in paleontology, I guess, is that there have been four primary extinction events in the history of the world, I suppose, since that 4 billion years, and so they talk about those ages. But the reality is what you're saying is that there should be a whole lot more than four extinction events, because
Oh yeah,
the world is hit, and in the frequency with which the world is hit with a asteroid or whatever that creates a nuclear winter, it's pretty frequent. It's
it
not,
is.
it's not every 65 million years.
No,
It's like
no.
every
We're
30,000 years or something like that, right?
yeah, yeah. And that's on a good day. It's
Good day.
30,000
Yeah,
years,
that's
really. But I mean, they forecast. Well, we shouldn't have these near Earth objects coming within the moon's orbit and the Earth, of a certain size.
right.
Maybe once every 150 years or so. I can't remember the exact
Something
information's in
like
the
that.
book. And
Right?
yeah, and so we've had in rapid fire, we've had two or three of them. And then they said, well, they shouldn't, these really big ones. Well,
Right.
you can remember about a month ago, one the size of a bus
Mm-hmm.
came by.
Mm-hmm.
And then about 10 days ago, maybe, one
Mm.
the size of a refrigerator just missed the North Pole.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
They are.
so
They're happening all the time because we've got great radar, and we can scan the heavens, and now we can see these things.
so they have these charts, of okay, this size, it's this many 100,000 years, or this is
Right.
30,000 years, and this is 10,000 years, and maybe this is every 1,000 years or something like that.
Yes.
And you look at that chart, and what people don't realize is nobody knows when the starting point is.
Yes.
For
That's
you
true.
look at that and I think, oh, well, it's going to be 10,000 years
Yeah.
before we get one like that. No,
Yeah. But it
no,
started out 9,999 years
that's
ago.
right. That's right. So anyway,
Well, yeah,
we'll get smacked again pretty
I
soon.
would say that the people that do that leadership, is always constantly concerned that the populace will get panicked, right? Whether it's the Brookings report in 1960 that said we can't possibly tell people about UFOs and aliens because it'll simply cause a collapse of society. Religions will be, brought to an end and so forth. And so you do talk a bit about.
So there's quite a debate, especially in the Christian community, about and really beyond the Christian community, about what these things are. I
Yeah.
think one of the most humorous things that is in the book is a quote, and it's talking about how all of these different shapes
Mm,
that we have, I mean, so many different shaped crafts that have been spotted.
mhm.
And so there's this notion, well, is the Earth some kind of intergalactic tourist center?
Yeah, I love that line. Oh,
Yeah,
it's
isn't that
great.
great? I
It's
mean,
great.
it makes you think, okay, well, wait a minute here. Uh,
Yeah,
I
why
guess
why
we're
do
yeah,
why do so many civilizations know about us and they all want to come here? What's so
right.
special about us?
They got ones coming in their VW microvans, and and
It's right.
whether it's Christian or not, you've got this kind of debate on what these things are. Are they from outer space? Or are they from outer dimension?
Hmm.
And there are so many problems, and this is gone over in great detail in
Hmm.
the book from all different angles
Yeah.
of the problem of distance and time
Mhm.
and getting here. And not only that, but Stephen Webb, which I quote, did just such an excellent job of laying out the probability of intellectual life on another planet
Right.
that has the desire to travel and all of those things. And then you consider the SETI that was set up in the early 1900s, actually just after the radio was invented. to try and detect life on other planets, and they haven't gotten anywhere with it. Well, that's kind of explained as well why they haven't, and why that's probably impossible.
Right.
But then there's the question: if you got all of these things, not just way out in space somewhere, but flying around our planet,
Yeah.
then that's kind of the elephant in the room.
Why are
If you
they
can't
still?
even communicate with them, that
Yes.
are that are like hornets around the planet.
Right.
Uh,
They don't land on the lawn of the White House. I mean, they're still we're still sort of just now finally getting to a disclosure event, and even it is very meager. I mean, the true disclosure, has been happening really in gosh, I want to say in spades since 1946, 1947. It's been going on even before that, of course. Jacques Vallée, who's a historian of this,
mm.
talks about it. But yeah, we're sort of right now though at this little precipice, and it does have, doesn't it, sort of a religious undertone to it.
Well, yes, and I quote a lot of different Christian leaders and uh, social scientists and people who discuss what the implications are if it turns out that there is an extraterrestrial, and what life on other planets means to Christianity or Earth-based religions in general. We go back to this ultra-terrestrial idea,
Yes.
and in religious terms, that means, are these angels or demons
Hmm.
that are appearing? And we all know Ezekiel's wheels, and that's one of the first things that came to mind in the ancient alien discussion as well. Chariots, of the
Chariots
gods,
of the
that
Gods,
sort of.
Heineken. Hmm.
Right, and that the motion, especially of these Tic Tac spacecraft and a lot of other spacecraft, they seem in a flash to move sideways or back and forth.
They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
Fighter pilots from the USS Nimitz flying Super Hornets encountered an aerial object that was described as 40 feet long and shaped like a tic tac.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh.
The object flying a random pattern, appearing at 80,000 feet, and then dove to 20,000 feet at incredible speed.
Yes.
And when you look at Ezekiel and his description, it's exactly the same. They move in any one of four directions.
Yep.
And it's like a flash of lightning.
And
you
it,
know,
and it also says with a will, because like whatever their will is, they go in that direction, which a lot of the spacecraft supposedly that have been captured are, they believe, controlled by the mind
mhm.
of the person driving the spacecraft. And so it's like you'd have a dashboard, but you put your hands on it or something like that, and then you guide it based upon your thought processes. And so, yeah, that too is mysterious.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that add up there. Even
Yeah.
Jesus telling us that when he returns, he's going to come, from east to west or west to east. Can't
Right.
remember.
It's
Yeah,
coming
in a
from the east.
flash. Yeah, in a flash. From one end of the heavens to the other. On the scientific side,
Mhm.
they look at it as the difference between a spatial visitor, ultra dimensional, and
Yeah.
that has to do with, from a parallel universe somehow, and obviously the Marvel comics, and they do a great job of keeping
Yeah.
up. They have some great consultants, and this whole idea of wormholes and these shafts opening up portals
Right.
and that sort of thing. That's actually what the scientific community is suggesting, because they're trying to explain these phenomena,
Mhm.
and so we're all trying to explain this. We're seeing something,
Mhm.
obviously, and so what is it? And so I'm drawing people through various things that I think are great points of interest,
Right.
and the people will enjoy. Then about halfway through the book or so, the chapters start ending with these parallels to scripture. and
Mhm.
parallels to Christian prophecy
Mhm.
and such, biblical prophecy, I should
Right.
say.
Right. Right.
And then the latter chapters of the book are almost totally devoted to walking the middle. Okay, we're kind of walking in the middle right now, and walking that out.
I think theologians call it the already not yet.
Yes, yeah, they do.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and it is that sense of which we're sort of, even when we deal with evil and Satan, it's that, well, he's been judged and he's been sentenced, but he's still on parole or something to that effect.
Yeah.
We're still waiting for him to be grabbed and thrown into the abyss, and for him as a source of evil to come to a conclusion. But just to kind of wrap a bow around this whole discussion, though, of aliens and angels and demons and so forth, I think what you're attempting to do here is to say that this is another search for the afterlife, for ultimate reality, and it's sort of pseudoscience, quasi-science that's involved in the History Channel's Ancient Aliens, and you tend to see that. You tend to see all of these guys that are sort of priests, but they really don't believe in a traditional God, and they're sort of scientists, but they're really not. They're not PhDs from Oxford or something, and so you sort of see that mishmash. I think it's important. I believe I want to say it's Stephen Bassett, but I can't. I'm not sure that I have his name right. That has done quite a few films. He's sort of the leading spokesperson for UFOs, and he makes a strong point that he wants to. He first off, he wants to make the point that aliens are not seeking to destroy us. They're not evil. All right, and
Mhm.
that's a point of debate, of course, amongst those that are doing disclosure that might want to create more rationales for why we need more defense spending. But he wants to say, on the one hand, we're not dealing with entities that are evil, and then on the other hand, he's wanting to emphasize that we're not dealing with demons and angels, and he is specific about that. That's in his view, that's a destructive understanding of these spaceships and entities as well. And so he's trying to block out those possibilities and just say the aliens are these wonderful people and they're coming here to bring us to the next evolutionary plane, to wholeness and so forth. And he's the guy that's leading, sort of the counter insurgency against non-disclosure or disclosure that has ulterior motives, as I mentioned. So I
Mhm.
think that's a pretty interesting development, which it kind of runs. I wouldn't say it runs counter to what you're saying. It's just another aspect of what's going on.
Well, I don't discuss this in the book, but just logically, it kind of makes you wonder uh,
Yes. Yes.
uh, why, when angels have appeared in bodily form and popped back out of our realm in the past,
Yes.
why would they need a vehicle of any
Absolutely.
kind?
Yeah, I know. I don't. That's what it's just really strange. Now, Dr. Heiser would say, well, this notion of what was in Ezekiel's chariot, that this concept of a vehicle or a place in the quote unquote firmament in which God and an entourage dwells, that is a consistent understanding in religion. I think he may be limiting it to primarily to Mesopotamian or Canaanite or whatever, but he reflects that it's not just unique to the book of Ezekiel, but it fits into a pattern of religions in that, at least in that part of the world, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, what Stephen Webb
Mhm.
has laid out, the infeasibility. I mean, he's talking about 1 in a trillion galaxies,
Yes.
the odds,
Yeah. Yeah. The Stephen Webb, and we didn't quite come to closure on that, but yes, I mean, he basically says we're it.
Yeah, we're alone.
We're
But
alone.
I love the way he summarizes the end of that, though. Since we're alone, how about we take care of our planet? How about we
Yeah.
not have all these silly wars and conflicts? How about living our best life?
Yes.
How about prolonging the life on Earth, being as careful as we can, you
Right.
know, to survive.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a very positive note to end on.
Well, it is, and of course, it's in the context of what we're seeing with Elon Musk trying to get us to Mars.
This, well, I think that's a good survival tactic. We've got these asteroids, and so having the equipment, having the rockets or whatever to go up and intercept or blow these things up or set them off course or steer them away, you know, that's all good. I think that's all
Yeah,
very good.
yeah, I do too. Of course, believing in prophecy the way that we do, whenever you encounter someone that really basically is, sort of, you'd say in life insurance, driving the ambulance in, but in cosmology, basically saying, well, it's inevitable that our planet's going to be destroyed, and we're gonna die as a species. Well, that's not what the Bible says. That's
That's
not right.
true.
Yeah.
It is, and yet this is one of the things that's in the beginning of the book, that is in the introduction, that I want to stress,
Yeah.
that this prophecy of the convergence of the material and spiritual world into the glorified state isn't the main part of the gospel, and it's not the main focus of the Bible, but yet it is there. It is there, and so we have to honor that.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of what this book is doing, although it's going into a lot of other, bring perhaps the non-believer
Mhm.
into a state of understanding. And I present three types of lines. From high school, we've got a segment, we've
Yes.
got a point with a line in one direction
Mhm.
that is infinite from that point, and then we've got a line that's infinite in both directions.
Yes.
And how that last one describes God, the Alpha and Omega, and that starting point with infinity after it represents eternal life that we've been given, we've been granted through Jesus, and that segment represents the life that the soul has been forfeited. And
Mhm.
Jesus talks about that. What good is it, to possess the whole world and forfeit one's own soul? And I have a chapter there. I get very evangelistic, actually,
Mhm.
near the end of the book, and my wife tells me that's an especially powerful chapter.
Okay.
So
I haven't read it yet. I've got to get there. Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. Well, I want to. There's a series of things that I wanted to kind of get to because I am, interested in physics and kind of the, sort of where is physics right now. So I'm going to kind of back you up and talk just about a few of these things. Um, First off, you you walk us through a series of, I don't know, more than a dozen scientists, and kind
mhm.
of there's sort of a building block effect.
With biographies.
Yes, with biographies, and there's sort of a building block effect in terms of, okay, what did this person do, and then what did Niels Bohr do, and then what did Hertz do, and what did Bunsen do, and so you've got all these things, and there's some fascinating stories, and it truly is interesting. But I guess first off, what's your rationale in kind of telling us those things? Where are you going to go with that?
Okay. Well, kind of the basis of the book is just as Philo used the classical philosophy of Greece
Yes.
in order to make his commentary on the Bible in an interesting way to the Roman culture, which was obsessed with Greece and the Greek language. I mean, a lot of people don't even realize the early church fathers in Rome wrote in Greek.
Yeah.
And so it was that ubiquitous in the Roman Empire. And so Philo was looking to classical Greek philosophy in order to make his commentary and relate it to that terminology. And then you go Augustine, and
Mhm.
you've got him putting things in Neoplatonic terms. In order, he talks about the first principle and oneness and things like that that are right out of that philosophy. And so uh, what occurred to me is we've got tools now, instead of parables that go back to farming and trading and housekeeping and things like that, we can go to quantum physics. I mean, the very cutting edge of human understanding of things, and make these same parables then, make these same connections as metaphorically representing what's being said in the scripture. Not that any of those commentaries take the place of scripture, but it was intended by all of these people as a way to connect, a better way to communicate. And so I'm using that same tool in this book. And so I didn't want the learning about quantum mechanics to be dry and over the heads of people. And right away, when I began to study it, these people who came up with this stuff, well, they're what they call polymaths.
Yeah.
They were so knowledgeable in so many different areas. And I might go over one or two of those, like Sir Isaac Newton. And we know he studied the Bible, his Bible studies and mathematics, chemistry, and all of those things were just as important to him. And he spent just as much time with those. He was a polymath, as he did with his study of motion.
Absolutely.
His laws of what's called Newtonian physics, or what's known as classical physics, as opposed to quantum physics. There's only two right now. And so he belonged to the Royal Society. He was the first one in a paper in 1672, watch sunlight pass through a small hole, then through a prism, and see that white light is actually made up of colors. And so he reported on that. And one of the things and I don't know, he very adamantly said that light was made of particles.
Yes.
And this becomes quite the discussion. So I want to make it so Newtonian, classical, the basis for physics altogether.
Right.
The guy is saying light is a particle, guys. Okay, he's laid it down. Then you got Christian Huygens, and he was contemporary of Newton's, and he was kind of most of these guys were fairly wealthy. They could set up labs, they could do experiments, they could go to the best schools and things like that. And
Fully funded.
yeah. His dad was a poet and a diplomat for the Prince of Orange. Anyway, he wrote a paper in 1680 on the motive power and means of gunpowder and air. Now, what is that? He's talking about a gunpowder operated engine. If we had gasoline back in those days, we'd have skipped the steam engine altogether. This guy had it figured out, and there's even some of his drawings in the book, and what he had in mind and how it worked. And he actually did an experiment and lifted over 1,000 pounds with this cylinder and piston device that was fired with gunpowder. I mean, this guy's a polymath. Now,
so he was about 250.
lenses.
He was about 250 years ahead of his time, right?
Yeah, he started grinding lenses to make telescopes, and through one of his own telescopes in 1655, he identified the rings of Saturn, that it wasn't just a planet with ears. That's kind of what they thought up until that point. And he also saw Titan, the biggest moon of Saturn, the first one to see that and write on it. Then in 1678, he did his treatise on light. And what he noticed was when light passes through a translucent substance, that it bends going in and it bends going out. So now remember, he's contemporary with Newton. And based on that, he's saying, I think light's a wave. And he got a lot of flack. I mean, he was not accepted.
Yeah.
Okay, but
you don't go against Newton and get accepted.
Right.
Yep. That's right. The first guy that gets on top of the mountain basically is king of the hill, and he knocks down anybody else that's going to oppose his view. So that we see that repeated again and again and again in science.
Thomas Young, and he studied vision, light, mechanics, energy, psychology, language, music, harmony, and Egyptology. Okay.
Yep.
At the age of 14, he was translating passages from the Bible into 13 languages, including Chaldean, Sumerian, um, Syriac, and
Ethiopian.
Ethiopian. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so he invented a phonetic alphabet, a
Mhm.
universal alphabet. Um, we had that about 100 years ago. What was that thing called? I can't remember.
Universal alphabet.
Yeah, the universal language. Oh, it
Oh,
skips my
I give
mind.
up. It wasn't Klingon, was it?
No, could have been. Okay. He compared sentence structure and grammar of over 400 languages. Before the actual final translation of the Rosetta Stone in 1814, he'd already made remarkable progress. He'd already almost translated the Rosetta Stone.
Mhm.
And so that's the kind of guy this was. Now, in quantum physics, what did he do? Okay, he had what's called Young's interference experiment. And so this is the first guy to come up with this double slit
Mm.
experiment. Okay.
Mhm.
And a lot of people may or may not be familiar with this, but in other words, you've got this piece of cardboard or something, and you've got two slits cut in it.
Mhm.
And then you let light shine through it, and then you have something behind it that the light can hit.
Mhm.
Well, you would think that you'd end up with two rows of light
Right.
on that back piece of
Cardboard.
whatever, the screen or whatever that's at the back that's coming through those slits. And that is absolutely not what happens.
True.
What happens is you get 5 or 6 bands of light coming through. And the only way that can happen, and he realized, was if it was the same way as waves passing through those slits, just like water ripples passing through. And then you had interference between those waves. You had crests and you had nodes. And so then that's the only thing that could cause that kind of pattern. And so finally, there was scientific evidence through him that light is a wave and not a particle.
Which becomes really crucial, as you know, I think as the story you tell goes, in terms of trying to decide, okay, is all of the universe particles, or is it waves?
James Maxwell.
Okay.
Just because he graduated Edinburgh Academy, published his first paper when he was 14 years old.
Right.
And when he was 14, he'd already memorized the Bible.
Bible. Most people haven't even read the Bible by the time they're 14.
Yeah, that's right. So obviously photographic memory.
Mm.
Some got it and some don't. So you're talking about this this debate, Niels
That's real.
Bohr and
Einstein.
Einstein, really Heisenberg and Bohr,
Against Einstein.
kind of a team.
He,
Yeah,
Einstein was
and
teamed with someone else, but anyway, it's isn't it generally sort of known as the Bohr-Einstein debate of
it
1967 or
is. It
something
is.
like that? Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, Bohr was had a lot more to do with it than Heisenberg, but I do have a wonderful quote at the beginning of the book by Heisenberg.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that, but
I do remember it.
before we get here in our study of quantum
Right.
physics, we find out that there's this duality of particle wave duality that
Apparently.
kind of like that old commercial for the gum, it's both,
It's two mints in one.
or I don't want to bring up the beer commercial.
No, please don't.
Yeah,
some
less
people would be
filling,
offended.
tastes great, but
That's right. Yeah,
yeah. Anyway, how would I know about that?
that's right.
Anyway, the advertising is how.
Yeah.
So what happened is you had what they called the the Copenhagen interpretation. And so in the Copenhagen interpretation, they finally resolved that there was this, as Einstein called it, spooky action at a distance.
Or
And
entanglement.
for entanglement, because what happens is when particles are entangled, I have to touch back to this double slit thing one more time.
Right.
Okay, and it's very important because it's brought up later. And what they discover when it comes to particles, and they do this with electrons and photons and even atoms, molecules. They've done it with now, and so this wave pattern that's created only happens when somebody's watching, when
Oh,
it's
yes.
observed.
Mhm.
Okay, it only when it's observed by something does, if there's a detector set up, and even if you fire one photon at a time through these two slits,
Mhm.
they will end up in these patterns at the back. So
Yeah.
how does a particle interfere with itself
Yeah.
unless it goes through both at the same time? They just can't explain that.
Mhm.
But if there's no detector, if it's not observed, they form the two rows and
Yeah.
act like particles,
Yeah.
just like you'd expect. And so they studied this more and more, and Einstein, they finally said, we just can't explain this. There's no way we can explain it. And Schrodinger,
Schroeder did
Erwin
that.
Schrodinger,
Yes.
came up with a solution, basically a formula, in which he was able to write a formula for the wave function that worked and actually solve problems. But then you had this Heisenberg uncertainty, which said you can't know, once you observe a particle and you know its place, basically, you can't know its momentum or other things about it. Or you can determine its momentum, but then you don't know where it is.
Yeah.
And so this mystery, what I call the quantum conundrum, basically. And so they were trying to put a wrapper on this thing, and they called it the Copenhagen interpretation. And they basically said, that it's just what happens, and we can't explain it. And Einstein didn't like that. He
Right.
didn't like that it couldn't be worked out in Newtonian or classical physics. And he said there's got to be some kind of locality
Yeah. This is,
to
if I
this.
may, this is where the famous quote, "God does not play dice with the universe," which is really, if I understand it correctly, was speaking to the fact that you can't know reality until someone observes it.
Right.
Until someone
That,
observes it, reality doesn't occur.
yeah, he made a statement about the moon still being there,
Yes,
when,
I'd like to
he
think.
wasn't looking at it and
Right, I'd like to think
things
the
like
moon is
that.
still there, even when I'm not looking at it. Yes.
Right, right. So he was really against this
Oh, big
this
time.
whole quantum mystery
Yeah.
stuff, and he said no, there has to be it has to be
Real.
local and real.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
This issue of
And
real versus sort of unreal. I'm not sure what the probabilistic,
yeah. That's what
right?
this whole
Yeah,
Schrodinger thing was based on, is the
right.
probabilities, and that's as close as they could get. And Einstein just didn't like that at all. So Einstein came up with a thought experiment,
Mm-hmm.
what's called the EPR paradox. And that's Podesky and Rosen joined him. So this was called EPR: Einstein, Podesky, Rosen, and their paradox. And so he thought that by examining this entanglement, that he could find a flaw in the quantum theory. It proved him wrong. He
Yeah,
said there's got to be realism in nature, definite properties, and B, there has to be locality. These properties are not affected by measurement being performed on a particle at a distant location. He said not A and B.
right.
Well, they did this experiment and found out that entanglement violated both of those calls for realism, both A and B. It
Yeah,
violated on both counts.
yeah.
And so it blew up in his face, basically.
Yeah.
And so he had to just back down. I think the next really interesting thing that you may have brought up is John Bell's inequality.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
This
this
is
is
getting
just
this is getting pretty deep, but let me see if we can raise it up a little bit, a little bit of a level above. All right. So where we're going with this is that it appears to scientists at this point in the 20th century, this is about the time of World War II, that it's beginning to appear to scientists that that reality is a combination. It's not just light, but reality itself is either a wave or a principle, or it's both at the same time. And so, sort of for, if I'm not mistaken, for the next 50 years or so, and even up to today, there's still this, search for ultimate reality. Which is it? Is it one or the other? And so, take it from there.
all right. Well, you know what? Let's just skip and say, the whole reason we're bringing that up,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going through all this is to get to the point where they're examining many universes.
Multiple worlds.
Yeah, multiple worlds,
The
many worlds.
multiverse.
It's the many worlds theory,
Mm-hmm.
or parallel universes and things like that. And so
And that's kind
they
of where
have
we are
several.
today, right? Scientists are
Yeah,
either absolutely believe in the multi-world theory, or they absolutely don't believe in it. It's a heated debate.
that's right.
Okay.
And so there's really two ways of approaching it. And one is kind of a geometrical multiverse, which just has to do with adding planes. Instead of 3 dimensions, now we're adding time, basically,
Mm-hmm.
and then adding more. Instead of a cube, we're it's to the fourth, it's to the fifth, it's to the seventh, in these geometrical figures that really can't be understood
Mm-hmm.
even. And the facets or the planes of them can only be understood if you add time in various angles to that, so that they can all exist at the same time, so to speak. And so
Is
a
this
lot of,
is this the 11 dimensions, or is this
yeah, it really is.
okay?
It's kind of a combination.
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of a combination in which the geometrical figure is associated with different angles of time. There's an angle of time where you can know about other places in time. There's an angle of time where you can actually cross over to other places.
It's
There's an
kind of the
angle in
time bending
time.
concept.
Yeah, there's a
Uh,
time. There's one dimension in which you can know about them and pass through all of them at the same time. And
yeah.
you get up to about the ninth one, and they say that has to be God, because it's.
Yeah.
And then they usually say, well, there's one. There's got to be, because of string theory.
Mm.
There's got to be one or two more than that, the 10th or the 11th dimension.
Yeah.
And they really can't explain much about that, except that theoretically it has to exist too.
That's what the
So
math. That's what the math says, according to them.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And so that's where they get the idea of maybe these many worlds, or the
Many words.
multiverse comes
Mhm.
from.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's really three theories. Another theory is that there are these branch points every time a particle is observed, or some kind of experiment is done, that there's a branch, and there's another universe created. In other words, if we go back to Schrodinger's cat, which we really didn't
We didn't
discuss,
quite explain.
Schrodinger was really disgusted with the whole idea of this paradox and the Copenhagen thing, and he said, just to be absurd, he said, what if we put a cat in a box, and we've got this poisonous solution in there,
Yeah.
and it's going to be activated by
Mhm.
this radioactive device that's going to send off enough particles, and when it does, at some point, then it's going to act. It's going to take a hammer and break this deal with the
Yeah.
poisonous gas, and the cat is going to die.
Mhm.
And so he's saying, according to superposition, and according to this idea that everything exists in all places before it's observed, he said, okay, the cat's dead and alive
Yeah.
at the same time.
I'm.
Until somebody looks at it, it's both dead and alive.
Yeah.
And he was trying to make fun of the whole idea,
Yeah.
but it became quite a deal. But so in this,
Schrodinger's cat, you hear that mentioned a lot on Big Bang Theory.
yeah,
It's,
it
it's the
so
paradox, the clever paradox of physics.
right, it is very cute. There's all kinds of drawings, and I've got some pictures in the book
Right.
too. And this idea of branch points and all of that is in this many worlds interpretation. And so what they would say is that the cat is dead and alive. It's dead in one universe and it's alive in a different
Yeah.
universe. And the fact that you observed it caused a branch point and a whole new universe was created. Shares a common history, but
Mhm.
now it's both separated.
Yeah.
Well, that's their idea, and so that's their explanation for how you can have multiple universes or parallel universes. So
Well,
now we've got two ways of getting there. We got the geometric way,
Mhm.
and then we've got this many worlds way. Well, Philip Ball has written a great article kind of disputing this whole many worlds idea. And he says there was just too many worlds, and one thing that really bugs him is the whole idea of self. Where are you? You
Yeah.
know, if
Right.
things keep splitting and you got common histories, but then you got these new futures, then which one of them is you? And they'll come back and say, well, they're all you.
Yeah.
And yet
If there's an
there's this
I
concept that there's an I, and
as in
then
capital I, not as
right, a self, the
Mhm.
self.
Right.
Okay. And he says this violates everything that we understand as far as the soul, really. And that's what I talk about in the book. He's really talking about the soul. He doesn't use that word, but that's the biblical understanding of the soul. It's our identity.
Yeah.
And so he kind of
Just
pokes a lot of holes in that theory.
right.
Well, then the next idea is the Big Bang.
Mhm.
The idea that during this split nanosecond of the whatever caused the Big Bang,
Yeah.
you've got all these quantum fluctuations. And that as this is happening, different laws of nature, laws of physics,
Mhm.
time, and everything else are being created. And we're only seeing the universe that we ended up in, but all these other universes were created in that instant,
Yeah.
basically. So we really have three ways. They really have three ways of getting there, so that they can build the case for ultra terrestrials, basically,
Mm.
and for supernatural stuff. And that's the whole thing. We all realize, based on what we call coincidences or
Mhm.
senses of presence or premonition or um, all of those things lead us to believe, yeah, there's a spiritual world.
Yeah.
There is something, and people can even know what's going to happen in the future sometimes, and they really do know. They're
Yeah.
really right. They may only be a minute ahead of the game, but they're ahead of the game. How is this happening?
Yeah.
And maybe you've
Movie with
experienced that yourself. Maybe somebody watching
yeah.
has
Nicolas
experienced
Cage.
that yourself.
Nicolas Cage is in a movie called Next, which was done, I don't know,
Right.
12 years ago.
Yeah, I saw that.
Did you see that? Yeah, I see that concept where he can see ahead, not very long, maybe like 30 minutes or maybe just a moment or so, but just that being able to see what's coming next allows him to branch off and to do something different than what would have happened if he hadn't seen it. And
So what's happening here is that theoretical physics is coming to the same conclusion as the Bible is laying out. There's a material physical world, and there is a spiritual or glorified or heavenly
mhm,
realm.
mhm,
And they're coming into agreement. And so, I mean, man, if you can believe that a new universe is created how many times a minute or a second,
Right.
and that you're in another place, how hard is it to believe in the virgin birth? How hard is it to believe that in the incarnation of Jesus? How hard is it to believe there's going to be this convergence of heaven and earth, this singularity of the two realms that's coming up? And so there's no, it's a more realistic, it's more plausible
Mm-hmm.
than what theoretical
That multi-world
physicists
theory.
are proposing.
Yeah, but it is essentially, as you know, in reading your book and your explanation or someone's explanation that you quote, you know, you essentially have it's the concept of what's called you've used the term superposition several times, which when you get into quantum computing, which because I have a computing background, you know, you hear that phrase a lot, but it's essentially saying it's a state of indeterminate. You know, it's not determinate whether it's the spin's going this way, the spin's going this way, or the spin's going both ways at the same time. And but the concept of superposition is sort of saying it's not realized until something happens that sort of freezes it and causes it to, you know, particularize or whatever, or become real in the Einsteinian sense. But waves sort of won the battle, right? But I think what you're arguing and what others are trying to argue is that it's not as simple as to say waves won and that particles lost. You know, that's an unsatisfactory answer, just like it was for Einstein. You know, Einstein could not get comfortable with that answer. But that's kind of where, if I understand your book right, that's kind of where the theoretical physicists today just say, you know what? That's just the way it is.
That's right.
The
That's
way
right.
it is. So just get over it. You know,
That,
accept it. That's what they're saying. It's a matter of faith, right?
right, right. And a lot of the physicists are saying now, you know, we've been doing that for some 50 years,
Yeah.
and maybe it's time we try again to figure this out.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
they just come up with wackier and wackier ideas,
Right, right.
as you can tell.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, maybe we have to just leave it there. It's, you know, you walk the reader through, you know, this. It's sort of a maze. It's amazing, and it's a maze also of building layer upon layer the way that basically physicists have worked, you know, together to ultimately build a structure that, you know, we almost find it hilarious. It's just, it's so ridiculous, and yet that's where the physicists have arrived at. And I think that's also why, you know, they talk about the crisis in physics. And you hear some people say, based upon what we're observing now, what we're learning now, what we're theorizing now, everything that's gone before, we just have to say it was just wrong. And that's kind of where they're at, from what I understand.
Yeah, you know, and going back to the very definition of quantum again, what they're trying to get at, and Max Planck is really the one who came up with what's called Planck's constant,
Mm-hmm.
which even Einstein applied in order to find wavelength of various things.
Mm-hmm.
The word atomos in the Greek simply means it's uncuttable.
Mm-hmm.
It's as small as
Can't
it
be
can
divided.
be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can't be divided, indivisible. And amazingly enough, even the early Greeks understood the atom amazingly well. And I don't know how. I don't know how they got it. But
Spiritual understanding is what I believe.
from the very beginning, though, they said the atom was eternal. And to the scientist, that meant that the atom basically was God.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that whole notion of evolution has spun off really from that. But if you
The
go back
Christian would
and
say, the Bible would say that the universe has come, God created from nothing. So the atom did not exist. There was a time where God created all of the atoms that are in the universe today. You could say it's the Big Bang, or however he did it, or whenever he did it. But that would be in contradiction to what the Greeks were saying, if I understand what you just said correctly.
Yeah, and we see that in Hebrews in chapter 11 as well. By faith, we believe in the things that exist were created from the unseen. That's a paraphrase,
Okay.
basically, but the same thing is stated there. But in the book, I go into this conversation of, well, then who made the atoms? Are they the eternal God? Do the atoms have a spirit or soul that drives them to express themselves in ever higher forms? And then, are the atoms aware of their progress towards some goal? And would they be will they know when they've achieved it, and when they be disappointed if they never advance beyond a rock, and so this whole idea that the atoms have been there and they're just doing this thing on their own,
Right.
And it's so ridiculous.
Well, it's I was kind of in philosophy major, more or less, and there was a saying, I forget who it was that said it, but he said, "There's nothing that has ever been said that is so absurd that a philosopher somewhere hasn't said it."
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So, well, listen, let's wrap up. We can't solve all these problems and give you all the explanations, but we've tried to touch on the many worlds theory, entanglement, quantum mechanics. We've tried to sort of, what Chris is driving towards is that there is ultimately a singularity, a unity between, reality, between what we observe, what is, ultra dimensions, the supernatural, the natural. They come together, and so if you are interested in understanding kind of the history of that, if you dabble in science, and if you'd like to have a Christian perspective on how these things come together, then Chris has written the book for you. It's called The Singularity Prophecy. And how soon is it going to be published, Chris, do you think?
Well, okay, it's out in pre-paperback right now.
Okay.
At Kindle.
At Kindle.
And yeah, it's a very reasonable price, and that Kindle price will go up once the paperback is published. And so I'd encourage people to go ahead and get it, save a few bucks. Yeah. I mean, well, I won't give out a price because we want this podcast to be immortal. Okay.
Yes, that's right. Yes. Like an atom, we want it to be immortal. And so anyway, Chris and I have enjoyed being entangled for you at this point so that we could try to explain some of these really heavy concepts. And anyway, so next week, I'm actually going to talk to another physicist, if things go as planned, Dr. Lambert Dolphin, who is a great evangelical of note, and he's agreed to come onto the program, and we're going to talk about some of his incredible work in various areas, including remote viewing, as well as his testimony, which is fabulous. So I hope you can join us for that. So anyway, Chris Steinle, thank you so much for being
Doug,
part of the show, and wish you every success with the book. And I think I owe you an endorsement, which I'll write up for you before too long.
Right? All right, brother.
I think I've absorbed enough of it now. I can write up an endorsement for you. So
Cliff notes.
Cliff notes, absolutely. All right. So until next time, God bless you. Bye-bye.